We want to welcome everybody to the first of a series of webinars we're going to be hosting for the Workforce Resilience Through Mental Fitness campaign from Utah Community Builders here at the Salt Lake Chamber. I'm Nick Dunn with the Chamber and with Utah Community Builders, and so pleased to welcome with us today James Hadlock from Blunovus. He's going to be kicking off our webinar series. For those of you who saw our launch on October 29th, you know that he was one of the presenters there as well. This is all part of our effort to equip business leaders with information and resources to be able to help uplift the mental and emotional wellness of their employees and really help move the needle on suicide prevention and employee wellness that we're framing as mental fitness as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to James Hadlock from Blunovus for his presentation.
Thank you so much, Nick, and welcome everybody. It is such a pleasure to be with you today and to present with you I think some really valuable information, especially with everything that we've experienced over this last year. And so just a couple of quick reminders. I'm going to invite you. I know it's really easy to get distracted, but I'm going to ask you to invest and bring your attention to this presentation. You're going to find a lot of very useful information that you can apply to both your own life and to those in your organizations and even at home. One of the other things too is please feel free to use the Q&A button if you'd like to ask a question. We'll make sure at the end of the conversation here today, and maybe in between, we'll look at those and respond accordingly. And finally, I'm going to ask you to not believe anything I say today. I'm going to challenge you to be curious and engage in this and try these things out for yourself. And maybe lastly, I'll just share, have fun with this. And I think you're going to find some tremendous value. And so with that, what I'm going to be covering is we're going to be talking about your well-being first. Next, I'll provide you with 8 tips on how to improve your own mental fitness. Third, I'll talk about the 6 ways on how you can lead your teams amid the crisis and remote work. And finally, we're going to be making just a teaser about a new resource that's going to be coming to you in the coming weeks. Brought to you by the Salt Lake Chamber and Utah Community Builders. And one other thing I'll mention here is I'm not a therapist, although I work so much in the mental health space. And so I want to also share with you that everything I'll be sharing with you today comes from very reputable sources like the Center for Disease Control and World Health of America, and the list goes on, and also from the work we do here at Blunovus and the data and experience that we have had for more than a decade now. And if you don't know me, I'll just quickly share with you, I was one of the top entrepreneurs here in the state of Utah, and in 2001, we were recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in Utah, but I had a dirty little secret. I was struggling on the inside. At least I thought it was a dirty little secret. And I was struggling with depression and anxiety and overwhelm, and eventually started to self-medicate and found myself losing my multi-million-dollar company, my family, and the list goes on. Fortunately, 13 years ago, I had a transformational experience. And ever since that time, I've been not only fascinated, but really dedicated to trying to understand more about mental health and how it impacts us, but how can we do a better job at being proactive and supporting those that we care about and love? And this is why. Did you know that 1 out of 4 people currently are living with mental illness? And I've even seen numbers of 50% right now because of the election and race riots and the pandemic. But I want to focus on these 2. And if you've ever heard me speak before, you know that I share these a lot because it's important to note that almost nobody reaches out and gets the help that they need. In fact, 8 out of 10 people will never, ever reach out and get the help that they need. And secondly, we as leaders have got to do better, which means we've got to understand the complexities that come with mental health and emotional well-being, because almost 9 out of 10 leaders will not get the kind of training necessary to really be able to support those in the workplace. But I want to talk about your emotional well-being first, and here's why. It's often, and I know it's been a while since most of you have probably been on an airplane because of everything going on, but What's one of the things they tell you when they take you through the emergency protocols? They say to put the oxygen on you first. And there's a reason for that. You've got to take care of yourself first before you can really support others. And your mental fitness is no different. So here is what I want to share with you as we walk through this journey together today is number one is all too often we ourselves are not willing to accept that we have our ups and downs and we have emotions too. And I want to just remind you that the first step to really improving your own mental fitness is to accept that we're all human and that we all go through these experiences. The pandemic has certainly taken its toll on people, but so has the election, and so has social distancing and being away from our friends and family. And it's okay. It's okay to acknowledge that. In fact, what I would tell you is that holding those feelings in is much like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. At some point, you're going to get too exhausted, and then it's going to create even more force. And so remember this. Know that it's normal, and holding those feelings back is not sustainable. And I learned that the hard way. The next thing that I would share with you is to stay connected with your family, friends, and coworkers, which means because of social distancing and everything that's going on right now, to leverage your technology through texting, through calling, or even using FaceTime or other video technologies like we're doing today in this remote conference. So I want to try and experiment. And again, if you've done this with me, I'm going to invite you to do it again, because as simple as this exercise is, it can make such an impact on people's lives in the moment. And that is, I want you to think about someone that you care about in your life. And I just want you to quickly pick up your phone and I want you to text them and express that. Yes, I know we're all remote. We're all in all different parts of the state, I'm sure. But just take a moment and I want you to text somebody and share with them that you care about them and you're thinking about them. And I want you to notice what that experience feels like as I continue to present to you the rest of these ways for you to improve your own emotional well-being. And it brings me to my third one, and that is, if you're feeling elevated in your emotions, if things are feeling scary, if you are noticing that you're upset or rushed, or you have a short fuse, one of the best ways that you can start to de-escalate that is to take a break from the news and social media. Now, I know it's important for us to stay informed, and so if you're using those outlets to really kind of stay in the know of what's going on, what I would invite you to do is use trusted resources like the CDC to find real information. And here's why. One of the things that happens is we get so caught up in all the different news outlets and people's opinions, and we can get really sucked into that. And what starts to happen is we latch on to those different stories, and it can create a lot of unrest within us. And a great example of that in my own life is the election that is still going on, right? And it doesn't matter what side you're on, but the more that I have found myself jumping on Twitter or watching news outlets, I've found myself getting more anxious because we're still in the unknown. And so if you notice that with yourself, I'm going to invite you, take a break. Maybe it's just for a couple of hours. Maybe it's for the day. Maybe it's for the week. But if you're interested in improving your emotional well-being, and there's plenty of science out there to support this, just take a step back from those outlets. My next one is about giving yourself some space to settle down and unwind. And I'm going to go back, since I have my own experiences just like you do. One of the things that you would notice, maybe the same way I did, was when we started down back in March when COVID happened. And one of the things that I noticed with myself is, because I wasn't traveling, I was scheduling meetings back to back to back to back. I was not giving myself breaks. I was not giving myself any kind of space to decompress from each one of those meetings and to really kind of switch gears and my energy. And And it was causing a toll on me. I noticed that I was being more short with my kids. I wasn't being as patient. And funny enough, it, I want you to just consider this for a moment, and that is to give yourself some space to settle, but also understand that our thoughts and our feelings are really connected. And just like ripples in a pond, if you can give yourself a little bit of break and allow things to settle. You see, we notice those ripples in a pond, and it's really easy to understand that when you throw a rock in, it creates these ripples. And just like thoughts in our mind, we can create even more ripples in our life. And so if you can take a step back and just allow yourself to have a break, it can change your state and your feelings. So take those breaks. And one way to do that is to take a walk, just to allow yourself to let things settle and kind of get back to normal again. And rather than getting back up in your head and then going with all those stories that can happen, it's really important to understand this one concept. And this has probably made as much of a difference in my life on how I experience life as just about anything. You see, most of us, we believe that we are taking pictures, and we're like a camera where I see an experience and I'm just taking it all in. But what would happen in your life if you knew that you were simply a projector? You see, we live life from the inside out, not the outside in. But it sure seems like we're cameras, doesn't it? But what kind of impact would it have on your life if you knew that you were a projector rather than a camera? That is a big question, and I want you to sit with that as we go along here and continue on talking about specifically how you can really regulate and create more of a settled space in your life, which brings me to my next one. And this is about letting go and about allowing yourself to understand that there are simply some things that you can control and you can't control. And I want to bring it right here, right now, and speak specifically to if you think about what happened early in the pandemic, and a lot of people were out buying toilet paper and all the canned goods, how did that make you feel? How were you navigating that? Did that frustrate you? Did you get caught up in it? Because oftentimes what we tend to do is we forget that there is only so much that we can control in our lives. And as you think about that, I want to bring it and fast forward to another part of what's going on with COVID and the pandemic today. And that is, many of you might be really frustrated because people are wearing masks. Some of you might be frustrated because they aren't wearing masks. So you have your own set of beliefs. But oftentimes what happens is we really bump up against reality, and we bump up against what we can control and what we can't. And so my recommendation for this is, if you find yourself getting caught up in all these narratives and all these stories and everyone's belief systems on what should happen and what shouldn't happen, here's what I would say. Get yourself into a place where you can control what you can control, and notice what you can control. Notice who you can rely on to have real conversations around this. And then when it comes to what everybody else's actions are, you've got to let that go in this for the sake of your own emotional wellness. This is a really important note because, again, oftentimes we try to change things that we just simply aren't in our power, and we lose ourselves in that. And next thing you know, we're feeling anxious and we're feeling frustrated, and it doesn't allow us to really navigate life more simply. Let's go on to the next one. And this is another one that I find to be very valuable and most often something that people talk about when it comes to taking care of your mind, body, and soul. And as you think about that, there are a lot of ways to do that. And this starts to really go into the place of breathing exercises, or maybe exercising, or practicing some self compassion. So, for some of you, meditating might be very valuable. For others, it might be just giving yourself permission to exhale and breathe and allow yourself to just settle down. By the way, this is one of my most favorites. I tend to do this if I'm going into a big crowd of people, or things are noisy. I find myself wanting to just take almost this cleansing breath. Some of you might find that meditation is another way that you feel like you can kind of get back to center. And some of you might find that going on a hike, or exercising, or working out in a certain way. I think the most important thing to note here is whatever works for you, to allow yourself some self care. I know that many people, because we're working from home, are feeling isolated and are feeling like it's more difficult to do some of these things. But I think this is the perfect time to focus a little bit more on you and your needs in a healthy and constructive way. And let's move on to my next one, and that is being able to see the good in everything. And what I'm really talking about here, and why this is so helpful when it comes to your own mental health, is I'm not asking you to ignore what's going on in the world. This is not me saying put on your blinders and then just ignore everything else. What I'm really saying here is I want you to take a step back and take a 360 view of everything that's gone on in the world, and then be sincere and open with yourself in finding the good that's come out of it. And this is a great opportunity, really, as we talk about that. So in the Q&A, if you'd like, and here in just a second, I'm gonna peek in there and see if there's any questions, and maybe talk about some of the things that have come up so far. But I'd love for you in that Q&A, if you can, I think you can, I want you to just share one positive thing that you can think of that's come out of the pandemic. And I'm going to go ahead, and I want to see what some of those comments are here. And so I'm going to stop my share of the video for just a second, or of my slide deck, because I want to see if there's any questions that come up, or anything that you guys would like to share in there. And I want you to think about for just a second, what are some of those things that you have noticed that have been a positive when it's come to the pandemic itself? Because gosh, I could create a whole laundry list of all the things that have been a negative, right? I mean, people have lost their jobs. People have died. We've had family members that have struggled. There is a lot of stuff that's come out of it. But what I want to hear from you is, what have you noticed? And I'm going to go ahead and share those. So one that someone has shared here is that I have more gratitude and don't take my family time for granted. Is that you too? Is that something that you've noticed in your own life over the last, 6, 7, 8 months? I think it's important for us, when we're looking at any situation, to not ignore the reality of what's going on, but to take a step back and really ask ourselves from a 360 perspective, what else can I see here? And I certainly can tell you that one of the things that I have noticed in the last several months is it's given me an opportunity. I mean, here's the thing. I am broadcasting here live from Midway, Utah, in my home. So guess what I get to do when I'm finished with this? I get to open that door, and I get to go see all my kids. And I get to do that more often because of the things that have gone on with the pandemic. So I want you to consider, as you're looking at all the things that are going on with this, find that there are some positives. And I'm going to share another one. Someone else has said, I've become more protective of work-life balance. With that, I've gotten more creative and have more suggestions on how I can make that work for both me and my organization. So I love this, because here's the thing I hear with that is, not only is that providing you with some different insight right now, but this seems like it's got a lot of sustainability for a long time to come. And so this is so important, folks, when it comes to your emotional well-being, to give yourself a moment to really look at all the different things that come out of any scenario. And you can look at this in anything in your life, and it's going to elevate your emotional well-being. So I'm going to share just, I think I've got one or two more around your own emotional well-being. If you've got some questions about anything that I've shared so far today, I want you to go ahead and put that in the Q&A, and I will get to those after I share these next couple of slides. So one of the other things that I want you to also consider, and this is one that I have also found to be just about as powerful as anything I have ever done when it comes to my own emotional health, and that is to practice some self-awareness by checking in with yourself often. In other words, do a little bit of reflecting, and that reflecting can take a lot of different avenues for yourself. One of those might be is, why am I feeling some anxiety right now? Or why do I feel so down? And then part of this is pausing and allowing yourself to see if any answers emerge for you. Here's what I love about this practice of being aware and practicing some reflection, and that is, it allows us to really look at our thoughts and feelings, and when we do that without judgment, it does lead to more happiness and growth. So as you consider those, I've got one last one that I want to share with you that I think is vitally important, and it's one that often gets forgotten when we have these kind of discussions, and that is, if you're elevated in your emotions, if you have had insomnia for the last 3 weeks and that's not something that's normal for you, or if you have noticed that you've got a lot of depression and that is out of the ordinary, and you're just wondering what to do, this is the time for you to absolutely seek out professional help. And this goes back to that stat that I shared at the beginning of how often do people who struggle with their mental health, how often do they really go out and get help? Well, 2 out of 10, 20%. And I'm going to talk about why here in just a second, but it's important for you to just understand this, that if I were mountain biking and I busted my wrist, what are the odds that I would probably go to the hospital and get a cast put on? They're pretty good. In fact, that happened to me just a couple of years ago. And although I waited for a little bit, at some point the pain was there and I decided, you know what, I better really go and get this checked out. But all too often we somehow are leaving our mental health out to the side here, and we try to justify that I don't have time, or I'm not going to do that. But if you're feeling a deep sense of despair or isolation, and you just can't seem to kick it with some of the things that I've recommended or talked about today, I plead with you to find professional help. And in fact, so much so that if you need that help, I'm going to invite you, and I'm going to share my contact information at the end, where if you really need that help and you just don't know where to start, let me and my team help you. We are so committed to supporting you and your loved ones that no person should ever be left to their own devices if they're feeling overwhelmed and struggling. I want to go to another comment here from one of our attendees about they talk about how they found it easier to say no to things that they don't want to do. And so they found their voice, and it started by using COVID as an excuse, but now they're more comfortable saying no. and are able to do it without the COVID crutch. Well, so isn't that interesting? I love that you have been able to kind of work that up and find your voice in that. So I applaud you. Thank you so much for sharing. Well, let me ask you, what are some of the things that I didn't share when it comes to your own emotional well-being? I'd love to hear from some of you. Are there some things that maybe I didn't mention, or have you found some of the stuff that I have shared today as useful? Because if you have that, I want to share that with the rest of our attendees and to the group today. So if you've got some comments or anything that you would like to express, I'll be watching for that. And in the meantime, I want to talk about this idea of why so many people hold back and don't get the help that they need. And it comes down to a couple of things. It comes down to stigma and job concern, and they're interconnected. These two are so intertwined because you see, when someone is struggling with their mental health because of the way that society has been for literally generations, and the way that we have wanted to act as if we're okay, oftentimes we look at it as it's a character defect, or there must be something wrong with me, and not just something that's happening to me. So we almost take it on as an identity. And the other problem is, and the data really reinforces this, is people are genuinely and seriously concerned that if they ever bring anything up about their mental health, that they're going to get fired. They won't get the promotion. They won't be able to interact in their company the same way. And I can prove it to you. If you've worked in a corporate environment, one of the things that you've probably noticed is if somebody, for instance, maybe got sick and was on sick leave for a while, or maybe they got injured and they were gone for a while, oftentimes when they come back to the office, there's almost a celebration, and maybe even a little party for those who've come back from those type of things. But what were to happen if somebody came back from a weekend in the psych ward because they were on suicide watch? We just don't talk about it, and we don't celebrate those the same way, those victories, I would call them, the same way. And so as I take you through this second part of the discussion, I want you to keep in mind that almost nobody reaches out and gets the help that they need. And most importantly, they almost never do it in the workplace. And so what I'm going to share with you, now that we've talked about how you can support yourself, I want to really get into more talking about how do we support those teams. I'm going to share one more from another attendee about, and what they said is that I can only fake it till I make it for so long. Is it normal to feel less productive sometimes? Some days are great, but sometimes everything just feels like too much. And oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for this question, because let me talk a little bit about the thought-feeling relationship before we move on to the leadership portion. So here's what most of us believe, is that we have this kind of emotional state that goes like this. But what it really looks like is we go like this. And that's all of us. I want you to think about waves in an ocean, and there's just this ebb and flow that comes. Well, the same thing happens with our emotions. In fact, when we're in the middle of an elevated emotion like anxiety, almost all of us believe that it's never going to go away, that we'll live in that forever, and we can't get ourselves out of that. But here's what I know, and here's what the neuroscience says. Here's what every therapist will tell you, that in almost every case, unless there is something severely wrong, and this could be due to other factors that I won't get into today, but in almost every case, those feelings are going to dissipate. And I'm going to go back to those waves again, that we're going to have our ups and downs, folks. And the best thing to do here is to understand that that's true, that it's not going to last forever. And that is not going to give you, if you're in the middle of it right now, I know that's not going to give you necessarily a lot of comfort. But maybe if you allow yourself to think about this when you do come out of that, it will be helpful to understand that we all have good days, we all have bad days. Sometimes we're in the flow, sometimes we're not. Just understanding that it's temporary, I think, can provide you with at least a little bit of hope that you are going to be able to come out of that. And again, if you find yourself that you're not having kind of this natural experience with life, this human experience, then that is the time to get a professional involved. And like I said, we and I will help you to be able to navigate that if needed. So with that, let's go on and let's move into this next piece that I think you're going to find very valuable, not only in your relationships at work, but also with your relationships at home, and frankly, with anybody and everybody that you work with. And it's about becoming a leader amid crisis. And the question I want to pose to you to start is, how do you help your team remain productive and emotionally well during the pandemic, and with many of your staff working remotely? If you want to answer that question as I move along here, that would be incredible. I would love that. I want to see what all of you share. But as we continue on, one of the things that I find really interesting is there's something fascinating that can happen when there is a crisis. And although we haven't seen it as much with the pandemic, I still want to mention it, because when 9/11 happened, what did you notice about what happened with the country? People wanted to come together. People naturally wanted to come together and rally. And there is a thing called the rally effect. Now, granted, we haven't seen maybe as much of that on a national level, but I can promise you that people are waiting for that rallying cry to come together. And it reminds me of what Gallup has done and some of the polls that they've done for decades around some of the universal traits of leadership. And here's what they discovered, that there are 4 universal traits that every single employee, and by the way, all your kids and all your coworkers are looking for this too, and you are too. But the number one thing that people look for in a leader is trust. They want to trust you. And there's some things that I'm going to show you that you can do to really cultivate that trust. But the other ones are vitally important as well. And that comes to next is compassion. You've got to have more compassion for people. You've got to provide stability. Yes, even in the midst of a pandemic. In fact, it's more important now than ever to provide some of that stability. And what I'm talking about here is not necessarily economic as much as emotional. Providing some of that emotional support and stability is vital to being able to support your teams. And finally, this last one is really providing some of that hope. So I want you to think about that as I take you through these 6 different ways that you can implement right now to be able to support your teams more effectively. And this first one in creating that psychological safety is to be open and vulnerable. And what does that mean? And many of you probably have heard the very famous talk around the power of vulnerability with Brene Brown. But here's the thing about you being vulnerable, me being vulnerable, us all being vulnerable and open is it brings people in. You see, with every interaction that you're having with your people, you're telling a story about your leadership. You know, if you're acting like everything is okay and we're just going to suck it up, those days are gone. Those days are gone, because that's not what people are looking for. They're looking to relate. They're looking to want to connect. And the only way that you can do that really is if you yourself are willing to be seen and you're willing to be open and vulnerable. My next one is to communicate frequently. And what do I really mean by that? Well, this is to have constant communication and keeping your employees informed. And that also means sharing the good news and the bad news. If things aren't looking good this quarter because of everything going on, rather than trying to hide that, you know, I had a mentor that told me that bad news does not have a good shelf life. In fact, it ages badly. And so it's important to note that even having that transparency, your people are going to respect it. They're going to want it. And eventually they're going to find out anyway. And so it's vitally important that you're communicating on a regular basis, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then being honest when you're having those engagements with people and having real conversations. So you can see how this being open and vulnerable and communicating frequently, they're really connected. And so is this next one. And that is being able to take the pressure off of your people. Well, so what do I mean by that? Well, here's what I mean by that is, you know that it's harder to navigate everything that's going on right now, because you're probably finding the same thing, that, oh my gosh, I don't have any idea what it's like to be that single mom who's also now got kids at home, and they're trying to do work, and they're trying to also be a school teacher, and they're just hanging on by a thread. If you know that, I want you to be open about understanding and expressing, hey, I know it's more difficult out there. I know it might be more difficult to hit your KPIs. I know that it might be difficult to navigate being working from home and having your kids at home. And the second that you can do that and really provide them really with permission to settle down, the more effective you're going to be as a leader. So take that pressure off your people. So this is just shining a light on the obvious and those elephants in the room. It is going to do so much for your culture and so much for your people. I think you'll be surprised at how much people will appreciate you taking that pressure off. My next one is really demonstrating that genuine concern. Well, this one is so key, because this is about taking care of your people as a person, not as an employee. This is reminding yourself that, oh yeah, they have emotions too. They're going through things. They're experiencing, they might have a loved one right now who's experiencing illness. They might be really torn between, what do I do around Thanksgiving? You can make such a difference by just treating people like people and not just another cog in the wheel that's there to fulfill their duties in the company. And what this also does is this gives them, again, permission to really de-escalate some of those emotions. And so this is what I'm talking about in creating that psychological safety, is care enough about your people to remember that they feel all of this stuff going on, and they're feeling the unknown with the election. They're feeling the unknown with the pandemic and with the holidays coming up, and what do I do? They're feeling all that, and most likely you are too. So make an effort to care about them. And then my next one, and this one, folks, is one that you can really start to create your own way of doing things, but hold casual meetings, whether these are, again, right now online, but even when we are back to operating, in a place where we see each other more often in person. But what I mean by this is provide opportunities for your people to share their feelings and concerns. In other words, create some opportunities that are often like what we call those water cooler moments, where people can just openly share and have conversations that isn't business related. I think a lot of people are saying we're all so fatigued with Zoom and everything that's going on with working remotely. But I can promise you, if you want to get creative, there are ways to hold some meetings that are fun, that are engaging, that are exciting. In fact, I was part of a networking group this morning where we literally did just that, where we had some reflective questions that were posed to the entire group of about 50 people. And people just got to be open and vulnerable. And you know what the biggest comment was throughout the end of that day of that engagement was, people were ready to take on the day. They felt refreshed. They felt connected. So this is where you can get creative. Some ways to do that. I've already given you one. Create a meeting where you ask reflective questions. Maybe you want to do one that fits your culture around everybody sharing, a recipe and that's their favorite for the holidays. You can do all kinds of things. This is where I invite you to get creative and find your own way on how can you hold some different meetings that are not business related at all. Like take that business agenda off the table and just allow yourself to connect with people for the sake of connecting with people. And my last one. I don't know what kind of services you're aware of. I don't know what kind of services you have at your company, but it's important that you start, if you haven't already, offering proactive support, which means you're talking about mental health. You're offering mental health resources and services, and you're not just doing that one time and that's it. This has got to be a part of the discussion. I would even say at least on a weekly basis. And it doesn't have to be a big announcement, but even just reminding people, your emotional health is important to us. And we know that people are going through things. So if you've got services, I want you to make sure that you are utilizing those and you're inviting your people to use those as much as possible, because we know that a lot of people are struggling. And if you've got some questions about that, certainly, again, you can ask me and my team here, and we can definitely direct you in the right place to find and meet your needs appropriately. So with that, I want to leave you and just do a quick recap as we start to come to the finish line here. I want to hear from you. What questions do you have specifically? Let's open it up to that Q&A as I pose on you just a couple of questions. And my first one is what are you currently doing to proactively address workplace well-being and mental fitness today? What are the things that you're doing? And the reason I ask that is we want to know, we want to share that. And we can only address this collectively, folks, and together. And that's how we're going to really be able to support each other in an effective way. So I'd love to hear what you're doing, if you've got any insight on that. And my second thing is what kind of mental health training are you providing your leaders and managers? Remember, when I first started our conversation today, I shared with you two stats. One, how few little people will actually get the help that they need. 8 out of 10 will never reach out and get the help that they need because of that stigma and job concern. So what are you doing in your organization to be able to support that? And the reason I asked the second question is almost nobody gets the training they need to be able to support their employees appropriately. So I hope that you think on those two questions deeply as we start to finish up here and I do a quick recap, which brings me to one of the things that I promised I'd share with you is an announcement that's going to be coming in the next couple of weeks. So one of the things that we do here at Blunovus is with all of our clients is we provide them with what we like to call the Netflix of emotional well-being. It's videos on resilience and communication and anxiety and mindfulness. And the good news is because of our partnership with the Chamber and Utah Community Builders, you as a Chamber member are going to have full access to this at no charge to you. This has been something we've been working on for some time now. And as we met with the Chamber and their commitment to improving the lives of our employees and our companies, they really wanted to lean in and provide something of tremendous value to each one of you. And so watch for those big announcements coming in the next couple of weeks or so, where you'll be able to gain access to this. And not only you, but any of your employees will be able to gain access to this service. So we're very excited to make that announcement. Watch for that again in the coming weeks. And I just want to do a quick recap as we finish up here today. We talked about how important your well-being is, and you've got to come first. Put on that oxygen mask before you start to help other people. And there are plenty of ways for you to do that. My second thing is I shared with you 8 tips on improving your mental fitness. And by the way, this slide deck is going to be, it's a reduced deck here, but about 10 slides. you're going to be able to have access to that, and I'll show you how you can get those. The next thing that I shared is I went over the 6 ways for you to lead your teams amid crisis. And these are very practical. These are things that literally you can start to implement right now, here today. And finally, I shared with you this new resource through the Utah Community Builders. So with that, folks, my last thing before I stop my share, and I'll check if there's any other questions that have come through before we finish up today, is if you want the slides, if you want any more information, or if you have questions specifically about how to really address and be more proactive in improving your workplace well-being, simply email us here at go@blunovus.com. You can also reach into the chamber. They'll be able to direct you in whatever direction they feel appropriate. And this is a way for you to access all the information that I provided today. With that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and to be able to share just a little bit about how you can take care of yourself and take care of the people that are most important to you, which are your coworkers, your friends, and your loved ones. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I don't know if Nick wants to come back on and close this out, or if I'm going to be doing that. I'll just kind of watch there. But while I have a minute, I just want to pause. And if any of you have any questions or comments or anything you'd like to discuss for the next couple of minutes, we wanted to be very mindful of your time to make sure you got on with your day and give you a little bit of space to be able to kind of transition. But with that, Nick, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you unless we see another question come in.
Thank you, James, and thank you so much for this entire presentation. I want to emphasize for everybody watching live, and of course, anyone watching this on demand after the fact, we'll make sure it's posted and sent out. But I want to reemphasize that a lot of what we're talking about today is the midstream and upstream interventions that are so crucial to mental fitness. There's a key tie-in to suicide prevention downstream, but then general employee wellness in the midstream and upstream. So thank you again for everything that you guys do at Blunovus and your presentation today. And of course, with your help with the launch event in October, this has been a tremendous lift with a number of community partners who have come together to support Utah Community Builders and the Salt Lake Chamber. And so I can't thank you enough for bringing your expertise to everybody today.
Yeah, thank you.
So we'll wrap up with this. Again, we're going to be doing these once a month in a number of different topics. We'll keep on sending out communications to all of you, to chamber members and other businesses as well, to encourage participation. If you want to learn more about the Workforce Resilience Through Mental Fitness campaign, please visit the chamber website, slchamber.com/workforce resilience. If you'd also like to learn more about Utah Community Builders in general, you can visit slchamber.com/Utah Community Builders. We'll have a lot more to come. Feel free to reach out to James or us here with any questions as you move forward. And thank you again for your time today.